Ago, ago, ago. Pens down, pencils down. So for your summaries, what type of information did you put down? What did you get from the seminar? So spend about maybe some few minutes briefly discussing before we go into today's topic. What were your reactions, thoughts?
Where I met also is deleted in the petroleum municipality, and out of this about 71% is what 75% is heat, waiting for collection to be sent to the website. And they have actually the vehicle and then household collection and matters. The program has become serious that it needs intervention. Basically that's what I think.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I was particularly struck by the fact that the municipality and the Zoom Lion had equipment to use for taking care of the management of these solid waste, but a greater number of them were not working. I mean, it's a sign that the situation is not seriously under control.
Anyone else?
Looking at the presentation, is sad to see that there is so much waste and just in a small area of the country. And on the other hand, you also know that a lot of money can be made out of it. So when they were explaining about the classification, which is not properly done, I was thinking what is wrong. Aside, having the possibility of recycling, using the plastic, the biodegradable materials. Mr. Lasson was saying that even here in Accra, they once, I don't remember the place, he said they couldn't even collect it because everything was
human feces and
it was quite a bit sad because I know from experience in my own country that you can make a lot of money out of the waste. So
what is your home country, if you don't mind me asking?
Colombia.
Colombia? Okay. Unfortunately, my Spanish is very limited. But it's okay. Okay. Anyone else? Is it Choco province by any chance?
Yes.
Okay, okay. There was a sister who came up to Chicago and told us a lot about the Afro-Colombians and, some of the challenges and things going on in Choco province. But it's a very heavily African place.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think close to half of the population, even though it's not recognized or in the service.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll talk further. Anyone?
Yeah, he indicated the institutional weakness on the part of the assembly in trying to get a handle on the situation. And for that matter, the issue of land, acquisition of land to deal with the issue of landfill where these things can be sent to also is like getting the issue out of hand.
Yeah.
Another is the seminar brought out the application of some of the wisdom that were in the inner town of the teaching mind, and then situation where there are rules, policies that they are being implemented because the assemblies that were being conducted were saying they were handicapped, they have sufficient resources to implement them.
Okay. Any other thoughts, reactions?
Looking at the institutional weakness and also the inadequate resources, we realize that they were not putting up much effort in order to maintain some of the resources or the equipment that they had in order to help curb the problems.
Yeah, the maintenance side.
Yes.
Yeah, something.
Another sparking thing that came up was to take responsibility in keeping the society clean. When they were supposed to get something small, they would assume that it isn't their responsibility, it's someone else's job to do those things.
Yeah.
I was also saddened by the fact that it was presented that the private sector, as we know, was more efficient in this building than the government. I think the government has a lot of resources. So my problem is why is the one with resources not able to do much in the relation? It's not the one taking the risk. I think there is something that needs to be also so that the government may not do that.
The economic aspect. I don't think you've spoken yet. I hope you weren't thinking that those who haven't spoken won't speak.
Say.
I hope you weren't thinking that those who have not spoken would not speak. Your thoughts, reactions?
I was thinking about the government's private sector with respect to the collection thing and the fact that the government's efforts in getting most of these waste thing down. It's not a problem of the central government because these we are not practicing the decentralization system. So in the first place, we have the MCs and those who have to take care of. And when you come from the central government, you'll be told that they released some funds for all these projects in those municipalities. And so then we have to go further to know what exactly the allocation of money for waste management in those municipalities and how we can handle whether they are properly being put to use with respect to waste management. And then we can take it from there with respect to, because they made mention of the fact that the cars are not even enough, and then the skip containers are not enough in the municipality. And so if the monies are properly allocated to the collection of waste, then I'm sure that they can, if it's being done, then they would have to improve it further by getting more skip containers. But if it's not properly done, then you have to probe to know where those monies budgeted for waste management are going.
Yeah, good point.
For me, what I was surprised about was I realized it's a big issue, but it seems much is not really being done about it. And I was thinking if probably we are so much made aware of what is really happening and let's say the problems it can really create. I think most of us will be much more willing or yielding to do, let's say, pay some small fee for the waste to be properly managed. And I'm also wondering why it seems the state is not so much interested in this or whatever would happen. So like, let's just keep accumulating the waste, and if it becomes a problem, like we are all just waiting for it to become a crisis before something will be done.
It's somebody who is not doing the work well, not the state. I believe that at the
Lower levels of
at
government.
the lower levels of governance, I can tell you it's somebody who is just not doing the work well. It is not the state. Because when you go into this, you know that monies have been allocated for waste management. It might be my needs. It might just be a small money. But somebody is just not doing the work well.
Somebody not doing it and letting a whole chain of people also become ineffective. I think that's what you really want to say.
Exactly. So because you can't put the blame on the central government. Because most of our
So
problems
Mahama should not be sweeping the street himself, yeah?
Yes, he can't be doing that. That's why he has allocated, he has delegated most of his duties to other people.
Now, if the central government, he also has a part to blame. If the person is not
It's a
working.
shared responsibility.
Yes, if the person is not working, it is
No,
your
you see,
responsibility
this
to make
attitude of
sure.
Ghanaians must stop.
Because
we seem to be putting all the responsibilities of us
let
on the government.
me do it.
Everything the government should do.
I was
Everything
listening
the
to
government should do.
is it the new
What role are we playing?
Magufuli? He went down there to one of the hospitals and most of the machines were not working. He went there unannounced and gave them 2 weeks to repair. Within 3 days it was repaired. You get it? So if the people are not working, the government also has a responsibility to go there and force them to do. And when the machines were not working, he sacked the director of that particular medical sector. He sacked him because he wasn't doing the work.
Then outside was saying that
it is a shared responsibility.
But she made mention that the government seems not to be doing anything. That is all totally wrong.
Among the other things that was said, there were issue of inadequate funds.
Yes.
And inadequate funds is a central government issue. And then one will say that where does the government get the resources from? From the mobilization of taxes, tolls from the assembly. But then you also need to look at it that public finance has always been a challenge in our part of the world. So that makes it a shared responsibility.
Let's come here.
Oh, we are breaking the debate.
No, you are part of it. We are making sure you are included.
Okay, one thing that struck me was when they were concluding, they said sanitation is everybody's business. But then the question is, does everybody know that sanitation is everybody's business? Yes, yeah. Like, are we aware that it is our own? We have a part to play in keeping the place.
And when there is not that awareness, the other tendency comes. And I was almost agreeing when she was saying that because they were talking about the tendency to privatize. And it's the same comment about neoliberalism coming to us and, making a big turning point in that regard. Because what is happening in Colombia is precisely that. Who owns the business? The two sons of the former president. And the other thing So the government didn't do well because they have a plan. And the plan was for someone, once you say sooner you do better, you have the arguments to take all the business out of it.
Yeah. And I think this is a point that Prof. Campbell was making, especially when we're talking about privatization, that if the government can either naturally be effective or be made ineffective, then privatization comes where you are IMF, World Bank instructs you, sell it to my cousin. I'm head of World Bank, sell it to my cousin. So we've seen this with STC going to Greyhound. We've seen it with Ghana Telecom going to Vodafone. That there are certain things that can be done that even if it's a well-meaning government, to make them very ineffective. Beyond if it's not a well-meaning government, then it's just a free-for-all. But if it's a well-meaning government, here even at the University of Ghana, that we're on hiring restrictions. So even at this very low level right here in the Institute of African Studies, there are restrictions. So part of it comes to, we have to look at the internal and the external, because there are even things that can be done to manipulate an economy to the point where you can say, all right, you can't spend money. These are the conditionals that come along with this, debt that you are taking on now. So you may be forced to go into the debt as far back as the 80s. And now, okay, part of the conditions are you can't spend anything on infrastructure. You can't spend anything on education. You have to spend X amount to service your debt or just the interest on the debt. So I think that, this is what part of what I heard Prof. Campbell getting at is that these things, if we're only looking at the very low level, we'll miss things. But at the same point, if we're only looking at the very high level, we'll miss things. But if we can understand the dynamic interaction between what's going on here on the everyday level and then what's going on there at the upper level, then we can start to understand some of the manipulation that's going on, some of the blame and the malfeasance that should, be placed at the low level, but then also at the high level. But this was something else that Prof. Campbell also alluded to, was sometimes in our research we can get very, like we're just doing a report, right? So I go there, this is what it is, I record it, and then I hand it over and say, this is what it is. But, a deeper level of analysis of why, this is what we're getting at in terms of, well, who stands to benefit from government malfeasance? Who, may, and this is a thing they talk about, following the money trail. If you can see who can benefit from something, you may also find out who created that thing in the first place. You understand? And vice versa. If you say you created it, how therefore are you planning on benefiting from this? So sometimes it could just be happenstance, but other times it would behoove us to go beyond just I'm doing a report and I'm reporting back, to starting to understand what are all the different factors that are going in, what are the dynamics that are going in. And I would draw a parallel to what goes on with natural resources. So with natural resources, we go out, we mine, we give it up to someone, and they make their analysis. They do the value adding to it. I hope you're following along. This is what goes on with natural resources. You can find a parallel in academia where we go, we get whatever funds maybe, we go, we do our report, and then we bring it back. And then, it's just a thing of, that means your theory is right. Whether it's neoliberalism or Marxism or whatever the ism is, where's the value adding? It's just like taking raw natural resources and giving it to someone for them to do the extra processing. And this is one critique that's continually going on, is that we don't do things that are very theoretical, and sometimes that is where the solutions may lie, where you're making a serious analysis of this is why it is. It's not just I'm going to report this is what it is, and these are the people to do. What's going on? You understand? So I think that as we are in academia, we should be very cognizant. Now, there have to be people who are doing this type of primary research, but also in addition to that, how is this connected to what's going on in Colombia? So this is African studies, talking about the global African world, not village studies or town studies or city studies or Ghana studies or West Africa studies. We're supposed to be African studies. So part of that value adding would come in saying, how does this affect African people all throughout the world? How is this similar in Ghana to what's going on in Tanzania or Rwanda or some of these things that came up in the question and answer? So if we are forward thinking in our own analysis and our own research, we should be drawing these conclusions, ourselves. It shouldn't be left to someone else to come and say, and now this is why your research is significant. Our last Kwame Nkrumah chair, Prof. Gordon, anytime someone does a presentation, you say, so what? So you've gone to Touch Your Mind, you've seen this, you've seen that, this is a video of someone talking, this is the picture, so what? What does it have? Now we'd assume that everyone would know this is important, but what does it have to do with African people? How does it affect people's lives? Who originates from this thing? Who benefits from this thing? All of those questions should be part and parcel of our analysis. Has everyone read the African Genius speech by Kwame Nkrumah? I would strongly recommend, this is the speech that Kwame Nkrumah gave at the opening of the Institute of African Studies. And in it, he basically gives us a mandate, a charge of what we should be working on. And he says specifically that this is essentially not to be an Institute of Ghana Studies or even West African Studies. It's supposed to be African Studies, where we're drawing these types of connections throughout the continent and then through the global African world. So he's saying this very clearly, but we find that sometimes what we can do is, I'm going to go to my village, I'll make an analysis, or I'll collect data and then I'll give it over to someone for them to make the analysis, right? So everyone look at that, the African Genius speech, put that in your notes.
African what?
The African Genius.
Genius.
Yes.
Is it the same speech that you made on the opening of the
That's it, yeah. It's called the Yeah. It's on my door, laminated, so if you don't have access to internet, you can just stand in front of my door for some 5-10 minutes. Okay, let's come to our topic for today. Yeah.
As I was looking at just as you were saying, the presentation, I felt like these are things, without this presentation, I still go off, and they're happening. And the question is, why?
Exactly.
And I was in the hospital, and nurse drank water, dropped the sachet on it, and I asked, you are in a health institution.
Yeah.
You are supposed to be aware of this thing.
Yeah.
Why is it so? So I went to her. My sister, how are you? I think I'm not agreeing with you. If you were my RME student, I might have failed you because you are lecturing there. She was laughing. I said, can I pick it for you or you pick it? And she went and picked it. And I was thinking, it's not only that one. It happened in Tampere College too. I was there, a student drank what I dropped it. And I was thinking about what happened to the social studies that you studied.
Yeah.
It's for education.
Yeah.
Is it a matter that you pass examination, get a A, you go to school, or our life change for the better in society.
Yeah.
I think that's what we need to focus on.
So the connection between what's here and then what's the action is. I would highly agree with that, and I will say this, coming from elsewhere in the African world, I have many friends who, contact me and they say, oh, if you can just send me a little bit of soil from Africa, like I would treasure this so much if you can just send me just a little bit of soil from Africa. I hope you're following where I'm going with this. And I always think about this because when I'm passing by, I see people throwing polythene, doing whatever, throwing their trash all around, their rubbish all around. And I think about, what's going on here. Now, for some people, and I won't say it's only strictly here on the continent we see this, there we say this, but there are some people who have such a value for Africa that they would never find themselves littering polythene. So like for me, if I'm riding trotro and I'm drinking water, I will finish it, I will fold it up, I'll put it in my pocket and wait until I can get to someplace. I don't see everyone do that. I see other people who are just taking it. But what type of reverence do we have for Africa, for this very soil that we're on? Now, there's a proverb that says, Sika benwa emwa. It's to say that if gold is close to you, it appears to be somewhat faded or pale. Right? So here is the resource that everyone in the world is coming to. The Chinese are rushing to come here. The Indians are rushing to come here. Europeans have been the scramble for Africa. They never stopped. All over the world, people have some level of value. Now, we who are supposed to be the owners of the land, we may not have that value just on a day-to-day basis. But I think that this is a very good point that you're making, that some of the things that we learn is like, let me just learn it so I can chew and pour, as opposed to this is supposed to have some type of impact on my day-to-day interactions with other people. But if you don't have a value for yourself, if you don't have a value for Africa, you will see it in every single thing you do. Your social interactions, you're dealing with the environment, every single thing. So part of what we're supposed to be doing is to let us have a value, self-love, self-respect, and those things should transfer into our interactions amongst each other and just with ourselves. So I think it's a very good point. Okay, I think we are going to constructing a research paper. Oh, your summaries. Let's collect those. Yeah, I'm not done.
Yes.
Oh, so
We need to complete some aspects.
is this what Dr. Akrofiansa lets you do? She seems to be very strict. Does she allow you to go and conclude with your conclusions?
No, we finish here.
Yes.
We just,
Then
so 5 minutes, we just, if after the lecture, 5 minutes, we'll patch it up and then hand it over to you, please.
Let's just open up the windows. I will agree to that. Let's get some air flowing and let's get into what we're up to do today. So we're working on constructing a research paper. Now before, I hope you don't mind, when I do my lectures, I like to listen to a little bit of music in the background.
Is this okay?
Yeah, that's fine. So we're listening to Salif Keita from Mali right now. And as we're doing with constructing a research paper, I thought it would be good to give us some background. I'm not sure if Dr. Akrofiansa was able to do this, but I wanted to deal a little bit with writing in general, and background in writing. Now, how many people are aware with, is that open too? It's open, okay. Let's pull the drapes too. Now, how many people are familiar with the origins of writing itself? Writing. Very good. Good. Please fill in with a little more detail.
It was an attempt to communicate the observation. So they were using a lot of materials to, and then using imagery extract their messages.
Okay.
But then it developed into a form that was hieroglyphics. They were using papyrus to do the writing.
Okay, very good. Very good. Anyone want to add anything to that? Maybe details, when it started, notable names and figures. Okay. Okay, no problem. This is why we're in African Studies. If we already knew all this information, we could go do something else. So I wanted to first start off with concepts on the origin of language before we go to the origin of writings, but I'll make that section very brief. Now, when you go all throughout the continent, you'll have concepts of the origin of language, right? And here we're going to choose one from Mali. So here they have an idea of a divine source for language. And they say that creation rose from a void, and the name of that void was Fu. Let's say it together, Fu.
Fu.
Very good. And by the action of Gla, let's say that, Gla.
Yeah.
Now what is Gla? Gla is, let's prepare ourselves for this, the creating but uncreated principle of continuous creation. I think we'll have to pull this one back just for the second one.
Put the AC in.
Is it what?
It's your real.
Technician.
Our AC technician. Request. Let's close up.
No, they can't. I can't.
I think it's okay. So let's come back. So this is one of many creation stories that you found throughout the continent. And they say that, again, creation rose from the void, which was called Fu. And by the action of Gla, and Gla is said to be the creating but uncreated principle of continuous creation. Let's say that one more time. The creating but uncreated principle of continuous creation. Now, part of this is the idea that creation wasn't something that stopped way back, when, that creation is ongoing. So every time a man and a woman come together to have a child, that's considered to be part of creation. This is something like what you hear when you say procreation. So it's an idea that things are always being created. So full of its emptiness, and its emptiness full of itself, Gla, by uttering a voice from the void, created its double Dia. So first there was a void, and from that came Gla. And then it uttered, and its own voice was called Dia. So now the one became two. It created its own double, thus endowing life with a dialectical force. Out of Gla, Dia, the symbol of human consciousness, and Yo, the symbol of purposive thoughts. From these, the universe was ordered and took shape. Now, is anyone else familiar with indigenous African creation stories? Is anyone here from Africa? So I would expect that whatever your own background or your own cultural linguistic group, you will be able to articulate the creation story of that group. So that would be homework, right? If you are Ga, Akan, Ewe, whatever you are, there's a creation story. And usually part of the creation story is an idea about the origin of language, right? So let's look at some of this. This from the what are called the Bambara people. Bambara people, and these are in Mali. If you've ever heard of Bambara beans, you're saying this is the beans of those people. Right? Just like if you say Fanti Kinke, you're saying the Kinke of the Fantis, or God Kinke. Or if you say Jollof rice, you're saying the rice of the Jollof people out of Senegal. Yeah? They're Wolof speaking, but the section of the Wolof are, you have the Jollof Empire. So you're saying this is the rice belonging to those people. I hope everyone is aware that rice is indigenous to Africa, domesticated in Africa.
Well, come to know it more about the Oriental
Yeah. So what we were eating before the coming of cassava, before the coming of plantain and other things, we were eating the indigenous rice. Now if you go to the north, you will still find people who cultivate the indigenous rice. You have the brown one, the red one, all of those are indigenous to Africa. It's called Oriza glaberrima. But this is also why we need to be doing African studies, because otherwise we'll think the Chinese domesticated a separate strain of rice. So both of these are coming from grains, grasses that grow naturally in the different regions. So theirs is called Oriza sativa. The one that was domesticated independently here was called Oriza glaberrima. So the indigenous rice, the indigenous food of places like Senegal, they call it chebujen. That's like the national dish of Senegal. So they're indigenous food. They eat it with their hand. They do all the similar things that we think about here. Alright? So these are things to be aware of. Because when you think about things like the fufu that's eaten in the south, the components of that plantain isn't indigenous to Africa. Right? The cassava isn't indigenous to Africa. Corn also isn't indigenous to Africa. And this accounts for why the foods in the southern part of the country are different from the foods in the northern part of the country. So the foods in the northern part of the country are the things that all of us were eating indigenously. The foods that tend to be associated with the south are the things that usually the Portuguese were the first ones to bring most of them. And sometimes you find it even encoded in the names, not all the time, but when you say Baudier, Audier is yam, bro is letting you know it's a foreign version of Audier, right? Efre is like a melon. So when you say Bofre, you're saying a foreign version of Efre, and you find it in a lot of them. Not all, but that's a very good thing of even using the language to encode. These are things that are foreign to us. Well, that's a sidebar. Let's continue. Let's continue where you left off. So Medu Neter, often called by lay people hieroglyphics, right? Now, more appropriately, each one of these is called a hieroglyph, and the system is called a hieroglyphic system. But usually lay people will say this is hieroglyphics. Now, this is from Archaeology Journal. And these are, what you're looking at are bone and ivory tags, pottery vessels, and clay seal impressions bearing hieroglyphs are unearthed at Abydos. This is in southern, what was called Kemet, right? 300 miles south of Cairo. They've been dated to between 3,400 and 3,200 BCE, making them the oldest examples of Egyptian writing. These dates challenge the commonly held belief that early logographs, pictographic symbols representing a specific place, object, or quantity first evolved into more complex phonetic symbols in Mesopotamia. So you're actually looking at the first instances of writing, which developed into the fuller system that we now know as the hieroglyphic system. And also, as you mentioned, and you can also look that up, it's an Archaeology, Mitchell 1999, for those of you who are interested in the full article. So what we find is writing was invented by Africans, and it provided several benefits in allowing the writer to transcend space, right? So here, I'm located here in Accra, but if someone is in Tamale, how can I get my message to them? Well, this was one method of being able to accomplish that. So I can transcend my limitation in terms of space. I don't have to go there physically or send someone else physically, through my, words that are written down. It can be transmitted even by passing it on. The same person doesn't have to be responsible for I'm going to remember it, and so forth and so on. It also allowed people to transcend time. right? So here I am in the so-called year 2016, but if I want my words to exist, 4016, by writing it down, I can make sure that my words can be carried on and can be understood by those who are living at that point in time. So for myself in reading, sometimes I read things that have been written by people 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. Now in an African concept, a person isn't dead when their words live on. If a person dies, their tongue doesn't rot. And the idea is that is from the living people who keep their words passing on. So that part of the person is still living on every single time I'm reading what they wrote down, right? So that's a very powerful thing. Also to transcend matter. So even though we will all pass away at some point in time, that this part of us can still live on even after the bones are gone. As Accra Hearts of Oak say, the bones are rotten, right? So just briefly, and in the seminar that my part of the seminar dealt with a little bit of this, but I didn't get a chance to really focus on the writing. But first writing developed in Africa was called Medu Necha. So Medu translates to words and Necha translates to sacred or divine. So even when you're saying hieroglyph, what you're saying is sacred in carved or incised writings. So basically they've taken a direct translation of what the original name was and transposed it into Greek via calc. The oldest book in the history of all humanity, the oldest surviving, we should say, is the Instructions of Ptah-hotep, dated to the 25th century BCE. Also the most significant religious text, the Peret Imheru, referred to as the Book of Coming Forth by Day, referred to by Europeans as the Book of the Dead, from which others that came later borrowed. So when you have an idea of judgment, you have an idea of death and resurrection, the idea of a Holy Trinity, all of those are found in the Book of Coming Forth by Day. And before that, they were found in the coffin text, and then before that, they were found in the pyramid text, right? So you can go back some almost 5,000 years ago to get all the concepts that we think of are modern. What we see here, and I mentioned this in the presentation, this is King Scorpion. This is how his name is written, as a scorpion inside of the Horus cartouche. And this is what he looked like in carving in his name as written. It's a scorpion with a stroke determinative underneath. And this here is, you're like, these are just scratches. But this is what's called the Scorpion Tableau, and it is considered the world's first historical document, and it's documenting an expedition, and each one of these lines is representing a figure, and they're returning back from a victorious battle, right? So again, you can look this up, again, in Archaeology Journal, right? Volume 55, issue 3. Also in terms of history, Jehuti Mess, right? So if you look at Jehuti Mess, he looks a lot like my man here. If I can get a profile view, let's turn to the side a little bit, okay? All you're missing is the beard, I think. But again, like the point we were making in the presentation is that these are names we haven't even heard of. Much less let's look at images of them. So part of the agenda is to make sure you've never even heard their names. Not to say, all right, once you hear their names, we'll say, all right, they didn't do much. The first line of attack is to make sure you've never even heard of them. The second line of attack is to say, okay, even if they did something, it wasn't much. Then the third line of attack is, okay, even if they did something and it was much, they weren't really black people, they were just very dark-skinned white people. This is what's called intellectual warfare. This is what's called the intentional diseducation, miseducation, and anti-education of the African. Right? So you can actually read his instruction. If anyone has ever heard the concept of Armageddon, have you heard of that? Armageddon? Yeah? Yeah? So that's coming from Megiddo, which was actually a place in southwestern Asia. And Jehuti Mess was able to defeat the people and slaughter them so entirely that anything seen as similar to a complete destruction was named after this place, Megiddo, right? And you can actually read it in translation. If you know how to read the Medu-Neter, the hieroglyphic system, you can actually read the original text, which is a very powerful thing to do. And this is considered to be one of the high points in the writing of history because it's shorn of all the various flowery, fantastic types of things. It's just reporting this is what happened. You know, on this day we did this, we laid the siege in this way. Once the siege was lifted, we slaughtered the people in this way, we did all of these types of things. So that's Jehuti Mes. And before that, the oldest text, written text, was the instruction of Har-Jadef. That's who you're looking at here. You can also read that one in translation. Now, all of these things are occurring right here in Africa, right? Which is part of the reason why we aren't told anything about them. And even to get access to them, oftentimes we have to go to museums in London and Paris. So our colonizers were very aware of all of this information, but they decided, you know what, the people who we plan on conquering, colonizing, enslaving, raping their land and their women and their people, let's make sure we don't tell them about this. Alright, so this is Har-Jadef. If you can tilt your head up slightly.
Yes, with these things, I get the sense it's those who are privy to study Egyptology who have a sense of it.
Yeah.
And then besides also, it's unfortunate that because the library which was in Alexandria, when there was a raid, most of the books were taken to Greece. Not Greece, and then that was used as the basis to start the Greek civilization. So, because of that, and then with the evolution of time, it's lost on us. So, unless we take a deeper interest into, or maybe those who have the knowledge in Egyptology, makes it a preoccupation to do that.
Yeah. Is anyone familiar with Aikweyama? Aikweyama. We had him streaming live. Yes, the writer. In some of his recent texts, Remembering the Dismembered Continent, Eloquence of the Scribes, and then also the Resolutionaries, he often laments that a lot of this information is what centers of African study should be working on. Now he says instead of doing this, what people do is they go to their village, record their grandmother's lullabies, and get grants and funding from Europeans for doing that. He was like, again, making these connections from the continent and the rest of the African world, from antiquity, to make all of these connections throughout space, time, matter, that's the work that we should be doing, but this isn't what we are doing really. Now, just in terms of the point, I went to Kemet, and Kemet was the indigenous name of what we know as Egypt, right? Kemet translates to land of the black people. Now, when I went there, before I went there, I was very much concerned about these things, and we all should be concerned that so much of our history, our writings, our books were carted off and taken to Europe, right? Now, when I was there, I took 15,000 pictures, and when you look at a wall like this, every single inch of it is covered in writing. So picture the Institute of African Studies, and every inch, the ceiling, every wall, the outside of the wall, everything is covered in writing. That there's so much that could never be carted away. But even if it's there, how many of us know how to read and write? We're basically functionally illiterate. And if you're illiterate, you are dependent on those who are literate to either share the information with you or decide not to. Right? So again, according to Alma, Theophile Obenga, Sekhanta Diop, so many of our scholars, they say that this is what we should be doing. This is the longest written tradition in the history of the entire world. Older than China, older than anywhere else. But we're cut off from the majority of human knowledge. Not even to say African, all human knowledge, we're cut off from the majority of it. Before we come to say, and it was African. And the only ones who have access to it are those who haven't necessarily had our interests at heart. Will we continue? We also mentioned Kagimni. You should put these names in your notes, so everyone open your notes and write these names down. Because what I would like for you to do is actually read what they said. So it's not enough to just pat ourselves on the back and say, yes, African people, we invented writing, yes. now let me go work at the UN, or let me go get a job at the US Embassy. If our ancestors were so intent on making sure that we carved all of this into stone, I think they were thinking it's pretty important. So if you write something, your summaries, even on paper with a pen, you think it's important enough that you think I should read it, right? So how much more if I'm dragging a 1-ton boulder, carving 5 inches deep into it to write this down so that you can have access to it? I think your thinking is pretty important, right? So let's read what our ancestors actually said, not just clap for ourselves and say, yes, we did something, what. This Kagimni. So after Harjadef came Kagimni. And you can read, this is fragmentary text. You have the latter portion of this is preserved. For Harjadef, that's a fragmentary text. That's the oldest, but only the first part of it. This is only the last part. The most complete is what we have here. Next, the instruction of Ptahhotep. So you can read this almost in its entirety. The very first portion and the very last portion is missing. But this is a text that deals with philosophy, morals, ethics, political science, and sociology. So to get to this,
Can we get this collection which was
I actually do have it, but what I would like for you to, I can do that, but what I would like for you to do is to find it, because all of it is readily available online. Does anyone have internet access?
No.
No internet access?
No.
No, not now, just in general, in life. Yeah. So the next time you're on Facebook liking, Angry Birds or whatever you're doing, take that exact same internet time to find this information, because this is what we're doing is research. If there's anything you can't find, by all means I would give it to you. I have most of this on PDF, right? Both in translation and the original Medu-Neter. But just to encourage the research aspect of this, come back next week and tell me if there's anything that I've mentioned that you can't find. Because underneath each one I'm giving you text that you can find, but then there are entire websites that are dedicated to translation. So this instruction of Ptahhotep, you can find no less than dozens and dozens of translations. People have built their entire career just on this single text. And it's like our former Kwame Nkrumah, he said in his inaugural lecture, he says, "I'm happy to report that African studies is thriving everywhere in the world except in Africa." Very tongue-in-cheek. So everyone knows this information except for African people. Okay. We mentioned the oldest religious text. Look this one up too. Wenis. 4,300 plus years ago. And what you're seeing is the name carved into a column in stone. And again, if I carve it in stone, I think it's pretty important. Even if I do something in Microsoft Word, I think it's important. So much less if I'm carving it into stone. Right? So this is the oldest religious text in the history of the entire planet Earth, from which others have borrowed from. So we mentioned the Book of Coming Forth by Day. Before that you had the coffin text. Before that you had these, which were the pyramid text. So inside of the pyramid of Wenis is every single inch. And it's literally, each one is like an inch you're writing. So each column, perfectly aligned, measured to a T, perfectly aligned, perfectly symmetrical, each line horizontal, each one vertical, in perfect columns and rows, right? And the idea was to write for eternity, to build for eternity, so that you all would have access to it. You specifically, those of you sitting in this room right now. This is actually what you're seeing here. This is Heru, right? And what you're seeing, Nesu Biti, this is the ruler of the two lands, Lower Kemet and Upper Kemet. And this is Win East. So you're seeing the name that's being transliterated here, right? Di Ankh Was Jet. So give life and power throughout physical eternity. Right? So it would be interesting. I think some of you,
So
yeah.
it's they are not just paintings.
And that's what Europeans thought until the 1800s. So they said this is just Negro art. It's of no interest. This is just Negro art. But then when they started to come across how deep the philosophy was and all the information, they said, you know what, we have to revise this and say that this is something that very dark-skinned white people did. So up until the 1800s, there was no question that these were African people. It was just of no interest. It was just Negro art. But then upon understanding that this is phonograms, ideograms, also understood as logograms, that it's a combination of a phonetic system as well as a semantic system based on the image, that each thing is telling you something. Now when you get into more complex text, it's telling you a lot of information. You have historical text, you have literary text, epics, you have, I think I said religious text as well. This is what we're talking about here. But every single genre, you have moral instructions. Every aspect of literature is there. Every aspect of writing is there already. And that's only what has survived. There's more than that. That has either, you can find it in the basement of the Vatican, the basement of the London Museum, the basement of the Louvre. So this is just what we have access to, and it's in the thousands and thousands of texts. A lot of it is found in Berlin, in Moscow. You don't find much of it in Accra. But this is what your own African ancestors wrote down. And this is what your non-African colonial enemies made sure that you wouldn't have access to. Because otherwise you would start to recognize patterns. Like what we're doing right now, some of these things we're talking about in terms of sanitation and whatever, we dealt with that 4,000 years ago. What was the lesson that we got from it 4,000 years ago? And that should inform how we should resolve it in this era. The instruction of Mary Carré, put this in your notes too. I want you to actually read the text. Again, you can read it in translation, so you shouldn't be intimidated if you don't know how to read Medu Neter. But also we have a study group for studying Medu Neter that meets on Fridays here at the Institute. So this is the instructions of Mary Carré. Also deals with social relations, social issues, resource management, all of these types of things that we consider to be modern. This is over 4,000 years ago yet again. So we're talking about waste management, we're talking about resources, lack of resources, how that impacts human beings and their social relations. All of that was here in the instructions of Mary Carré. And those who set up your school system, the British, were very clear on that, because we still use the British system to translate and transliterate. And the document here, you can find a PDF of this online, Merriam-Webster, Ancient Egyptian Literature, Volume 1, 2, and 3. You can actually read a huge survey, 3-volume survey of every single genre that's available to us in translation. This is in English translation, so it's very accessible. You can also look up Library Genesis.
Are these translations made by Africans or?
You have a combination. So the one from Theophile Obenga, I can actually show you the book African Philosophy of the Pharaonic Period, and that's probably the most comprehensive text translated by an African. And in it, it goes into the origins of all these various disciplines and genres. So he'll give examples of medical texts, talking about dislocation of vertebrae, dealing with the circulatory system and how the heart is connected to arteries, dealing with paralysis and how to deal with it, how to deal with brain damage and concussions. All of that is just in, the medical text. So he gives the text in Medu Neter, then he gives a transliteration and the translation, then a thorough commentary. This particular text, Ancient Egyptian Literature, was by a non-African. So anytime you read something by a non-African, you always want to cross-reference it.
Because I'm wondering if they might have just tempered with it just for the sake of not making us know exactly what it is.
And this is why there was a scholar named Jacob Carruthers. Write down this name, Jacob Carruthers, an African, based out of U.S., out of Chicago actually. And he says, and I'm paraphrasing, African champions must... Carruthers, Carruthers, T-H-E-R-S, Carruthers.
Carruthers.
Mm-hmm.
We say Carruthers.
Yeah.
C-A-R-R-U-T-H-E-R-S.
Yeah.
E-R-S.
Yeah, Carruthers. If you've only seen it written, you would say Carruthers, but the U isn't a hard U. Yeah, yeah. Here in Ghana.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, Ghana pronunciation is going to be different from other pronunciations. Yeah. There were lots of names that I didn't know were even English names when I came to Ghana. Like Priscilla. Here they say Prisla. I thought it must be an Ewe name or something. I didn't even recognize that it was supposed to be an English name. And then someone said, they wrote it for me, and I said, is that what you've been saying? But yeah, it's all the same. Tomato, I think. This is Sanhat, put this here. This is a translation by Aikwe Alma, who we mentioned earlier. And he translates it into Fanti, into Wolof, into isiZulu, into Kiswahili, Kikongo, and then into English, French, and Portuguese. The world's oldest epic, again, just around 4,000 years old. And if you know how to read Fanti, you can be right at home and just read it straight into the Fanti. And it's about a man who leaves Kemet because of an assassination, and he's fearing for his life, so he goes into Southwestern Asia. He accomplishes much, but in his old age he returns to Kemet. So that's the epic journey that he goes on. But it's very rich. It's considered very rich in terms of certain universal themes and things of that nature. Sanhat. Also, this is what we mentioned before, the oldest historical document. This is a scorpion tableau discovered in 1995 by Dr. John Coleman, a Yale Egyptologist, and his wife, Dr. Deborah Darnell. So it was found at Gebel Chauti, incised with flint tools, and the figures and symbols that appear to depict a procession of a ruler returning to the city of Abydos after vanquishing a rival leader at Nakada. So what you see there on the stone, this is a line drawing of it. And Scorpion, who the ruler's name is, you're seeing his name written here, Scorpion. So each individual is representing a group, right, who returned with him in the procession. So when you think about different clans especially, so even in Ghana to this day you have people who are like Adriana, and that's associated with that's associated with the dog. You have Ekwana, that's what they call the water buffalo or bush cow. So you can go along. So this was an idea that you found in Kemet as well, that each nome had an animal that's associated with it. And this is also the origin of where you find sports teams associated with this. So Chicago Bulls or Atlanta Hawks is taking the same type of idea. And then also nations. So if you look at the U.S., the American eagle is the symbol of the U.S. You can find it all throughout. But this is the genesis and origin of it, both in African societies and non-African societies. So look that up, the Scorpion Tableau, T-A-B-L-E-U, And then this is what are called the uniliterals. So each one has its own sound value. So just like how you're saying, it's not just pictures, each one has a sound value. So ah, e, ah, u, bo, pa, fa, ma, na, ra, kwa, ka, ga, ta, ch, da, j. Right? And then this is also the source of non-African writing systems. So what they call Egyptian or Middle Necher is a direct correlation to what was copied into Greek and then into Latin, which is the script we use now. So Gardiner, who's probably one of the most famous Egyptologists in terms of codifying the study of the language, he said when we're writing our alphabet, ABCs and whatever, we're doing nothing but what we got directly from ancient Kemet. Right? So you see the B is the Ba, and the Ba is the word for the soul, often translated as soul. It's the aspect that goes out when you dream. So each and every one. And then also you can look at connections to other African languages. So, for example, and these are just a few examples, but you can find it throughout the language. So, in Medu Netra, this is bi, e, and then this lets you know that whatever the word is talking about is something bad, and this is actually the word for bad. Now, if you come throughout the continent, you will find that this is still the case. So, in Akan Boni, right, and this is a source. Wolof, this is in Senegal, Bon, right? So if I say Nitku Bonga, I'm saying that you are a bad person. That's the same Bon. Then Songha, that's in Mali, Boni. The word for in or inside, this is just the sound value right? So you find in Akan, you use the same mu for inside. Kikongo, spoken in Congo, DRC, Brazza, so forth and so on. Gabon and Angola, they use the exact same mu for inside. For Baule in Cote d'Ivoire, they use a mo for inside. For arm, Akan, you have Aba or Basa, Yoruba, Apa, Chiluba, that's in Congo, Iboko. So you can find how all humanity started in this area, you know, the south of the Nile Valley, also Omo River Valley, which are these contiguous river valleys in areas of Ethiopia, Uganda, those types of areas. So the question isn't, did you come from there? It's when did your particular division of humanity leave from there? Now for Eurasians, they left around 50,000 to 80,000 years ago. But then you have other African groups who stayed there up until they were driven out by the inhabitants that we associate with now, those places, you know, the Arabic types and those types. But even when you go there, the further south you get, the darker the people are. So not everyone, you know, was driven out. As soon as you start to get to Aswan, Abu Simbel, the people start to look like Ghanaians, people who you would see on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, presently, right now. Very, yes. Yeah, and I can actually show you some images and video of people who are there now, if you're interested. And then,
they didn't migrate ever since.
Not everyone migrated. Yeah. So a huge number of Africans migrated away with the onslaught of the Hyksos, then the Persians, then the Romans, the Greeks, the Arabs. You know, many people don't want to be under the hegemony of people who they were formerly ruling, so they left, but others decided to stay, and those who stayed are still there. So again, when you're in Cairo, people look very much like any Arab that you would think of, but as you move further south, the further south you come, the darker the people are.
Can you detect linguistically the base of what the language they speak and they make their connection with other African languages?
Yes, yeah. That's the work of Theophilo Benga, Cheikh Anta Diop, and others. That's exactly what they've been working on over the years. But again, you know, we don't get that in primary, we don't get it in JSS, we don't get it in SS. Hopefully at university at some point we will get it. But again, if it's not part of our curriculum, people can work for their entire lives to make these connections, but the layperson would never hear about it. But I can give you some text if you're interested in that. Also, when we talk about unspoken communication, the word for kham, to know not, to be ignorant of, to be unconscious of, these ones have the sound value kham, and then this is what's called the determinative, that lets you know the general semantic value of what this word is. So when you want to say you don't know something, in Ghana, people say, this is exactly what this is an image of, semantically. So even the movements that we do, we think it's just something that we do, but again, they trace back to the origins. Yeah, like if I don't have any idea. I see people do this all the time. And I say, I wonder if they know how far back, even the word for writing, to have no idea. It has this exact same motion that you do. And then the word kai, to think about or plan. So this is the ka, this ka, a, and then this lets you know that whatever you're dealing with has something to do with thinking or speaking or something related to, you know, when you do this, what you're doing right now. So if you, what you're doing right now, so we think this is just something that we're doing, but it is something that we've been doing for at least thousands and thousands of years, and we haven't stopped doing it. This word for sach, and then this lets you know something dealing with reverence, and then this is what the reverence is for. This is the word for to make libation or pour out water. So if you go to a shrine today, you will see people you know, who are crouching down. You see people who are pouring water, right? So again, these are things that go back thousands of years that we've been doing for thousands of years unstopped until this generation, basically. And that's where we're deciding to cut a line from everything we've been doing as African people. And then here, swash, to pay honor or applaud. Now, people dance, you'll see them do this, right? And this is exactly what you see as a determinative. So, you know, not only the verbal, the written, the non-verbal is also encoded in the language. And you'll see that the things you do, it's just, oh, it's Ghanaian culture. Well, before there was anything called modern Ghana or the ancient Ghana, you were doing these things from the places where all humanity originated. And part of the idea is that language itself started out here, and it was a complete and refined system before the first Homo sapiens left out of the continent. So this is going back at least 50,000 years ago that we had a complete language in terms of syntax, morphology. All these complex types of structures were already in place that long ago. And that's the reason why Europeans have a language. That's the reason why Asians have a language, is because it was already a complete system before those types of migrations came out. And also put this in your notes, other African writing systems. A few, or we can say several other significant writing systems developed in Africa. The Meroitic writing system, Ge'ez writing system, Bamum. So Meroitic is what we now call the Sudan area, Ethiopia area. Ge'ez is what we now know as modern day Ethiopia. Bamum was invented in what we now know as Cameroon. And that one also had a printing system. Mende or Nko is found mainly in Mali, but in all places that variations of Mende are found. So when we're talking about Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, even in Ghana, northern Ghana, Likpakpan is a Mende type of language. Mali, of course, going all the way to Senegal, Guinea, or Gambia as well, Guinea-Bissau, all of those places you find Mende family of languages. This is a writing system for encoding those. They go by different names in different places, but it's all the language family. So some places called Mende, other places called Mandinka, other places called Mandingo, other places called Jula, which doesn't sound alike. In Mali it's called Bamana. That's the creation story that we looked at. But again, they have their own writing system. Also the Vai script writing system. And that's in what is now modern day Liberia and contiguous zones in Sierra Leone. Nsibidi is southeastern Nigeria. Tifana is in what we now know northern Mali, southern Libya, that type of area, Algeria, all those border countries. And these are not all. So African people independently and sometimes as a consequence of contact develop writing systems time and time and time and time again. And even the non-African ones, the ones that we think are non-African, are ultimately derived from that. Now, how many people think about African people when you think about the origins of writing?
Before?
Yeah.
I only know about the Egyptian
Yeah.
hieroglyphs.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. So again, all throughout the continent.
Also, something like numbers originated in Africa.
Yeah.
The Greeks describe the Africans who are using it as witches.
Yeah.
Numbers. So someone said Africa has no then anything that I told you which is not science to build on numbers mathematics. And
Yeah.
if the originator is an African, then you have to respect what is African.
Yeah. The oldest mathematical tool in the face of the entire planet goes back 37,000 years ago. Write this in your notes. Le Bombo Bon. Le Bombo Bon. 37,000 years ago. And what it is the fibula of a baboon, and inscribed on it are the prime numbers, multiplication, division problems, all of these. And it was thought to be associated with one, the moon, and then also the menstrual cycle. Lebombo, Lebombo, B-O-M-B-O. So that's the first one. The second oldest mathematical tool is also in Africa. It's also a baboon's fibula, and that's the Ishango bone. I-S-H-A-N-G-O. Ishango. Now you may be wondering, well, why a baboon of all animals for both the first one and the second one? And again, mathematics was very closely associated with the lunar cycle and the menstrual cycle. And baboons, what they do is overnight, and especially getting towards dawn, they howl at the moon. So there's association with, we are intentionally using this animal that is associated with the moon in order to deal with all things mathematical. And you also find that in ancient Kemet, the deity that was associated with mathematics, the origin of mathematics, writing, calculation, was Jehuti, who was also represented by a baboon. So that here we're talking about 5,000, 6,000 years ago, but you find that going back, the Ishango bone is around 22,000 years ago. The Lebombo bone is 37,000 years ago. So you find this continuous concept of mathematics has to do with the moon, and animals associated with the moon should represent what mathematics is. All right? Okay, so now we're coming to our actual topic for today. And we'll deal with, I hope that was useful for some of us. Yeah? And what I want you to do is, you know, we're supposed to be moving towards being a research intensive university. So what I want you to do is believe absolutely nothing that I've told you. I want you to research everything, right? And what you'll find is that people have built their entire careers, especially non-Africans, on this information. Meanwhile, we've been starved of information. So everyone knows what the African has done except for the African. And now, what is the impact of that? The fact that we don't know anything about who we are, generally speaking, unless we go out of our standard curriculum and learn about it and read other people's PhD theses in fields like Egyptology, archaeology, archaeoastronomy, so forth and so on. Very reputable journals, reputable books. Some of the most learned scholars in the entire world are writing this information, but we just aren't exposed to it. So here we're coming to journals, and we'll start off with types of journals and types of articles, and then we'll move into constructing your research paper, right? And we'll deal with the various types of papers that you can do. So types of journals, and you can look at this link at the bottom. This is actually coming directly from that link. You have traditional academic research journals, and this is what we usually think of when we think about research journals. This is a main venue for primary research, rigorously blind peer reviewed. And the main thing about blind peer review is that the idea is to ensure that it's not that, oh, I look at your face or I look at your name and I say you will never publish in this journal. And this is especially something that has been practiced when people see, all right, either the topic is Africa or it's an African who's writing it. So part of this is a reaction to prejudice and other types of things that can come in. And it still comes in if you're saying, all right, I'm going to do a study on Yendi, I'm going to do a study on Techiman, and it's like, oh, you should submit this to a specialist journal on Africa, not into a, you know, general prestigious international journal like Nature. That's for Europeans. Now Europeans can say, I'm only going to study London. They'll say that's universal. But if you're studying Techiman, no, you should submit to a specialist journal. Techiman studies quarterly. Let me pause briefly. And what I'm doing is, okay. Yeah, okay means put your pen down. Alright, so let's come to this. So there are different types of journals. Now, has anyone written a scholarly article for a journal? Or a chapter for a book? No? I'm not sure if Dr. Akrofiansa made you aware, but the paper that you do for this class, based on your own research, will be submitted to a journal, a peer-reviewed journal. Did she let you know?
She briefly stated it, but not the details.
Okay, so details forthcoming. And what I'll do, I'll start off next class, just for the sake of time, maybe at the end of this class, to get a little bit of background on what your own research areas are, and that is what you'll be focusing on. And what you'll do is that you'll be writing it in such a way that by the end of this particular class, you will submit it to a peer-reviewed journal, and that is actually part of your final grade. Now, it may or may not be accepted, but your grade is based on you completing it, submitting it to us, and then also submitting to the peer-reviewed journal. And what you'll do is you'll give us proof of the submission. So sometimes it's an online system email. Okay, but let's come here. And before we do, just on a last note on writing and the background on writing. Now, how many people think that it would be important for your own writing to know that your ancestors invented writing? How many people think that it would help your writing to know that your ancestors invented writing? It may or may not, but does anyone think that it may have any influence? Is the question clear?
Yes.
No? That if you know your ancestors invented writing, do you think that would make you write better? Or if you think that this is something that a white man brought off a ship and thank goodness you brought me this, if my small African brain can wrap it around this pen, maybe I can do something? Do you think that there will be a different outcome in knowing my ancestors invented this entire skill versus thinking that this is something that perhaps Eurasian colonizers brought to you? Do you think there will be different outcomes based on knowledge or lack thereof?
I think it will be different because when you know that the people have already been doing it, and you find out that what you're doing have to do is nothing new, that's something that's out of you, and that you don't need so much effort, and that just like your predecessors, your ancestors, they can take you from them.
Yeah.
And I like that one. I know I happen to like things of mathematics nature, but then I veered off. Later, I used to argue with people that our own people can get into this technology and this thing because I believe that if it's all being based on mathematics and mathematics, raising this science, then it means that people can do it. And it's a matter that you get disconnected from the present thing. And so it looks like something new, you have to learn it all over again.
Yeah, these are very good points, and I think they're very valid points. And I think these points are also the reason why we don't learn about these things, whether we're in the Cambridge curriculum or the Ghana curriculum, which is based on some type of Eurasian curriculum. Like oftentimes I'll start off my classes and the students will know the names of all these Europeans, but they don't know the names of any Africans. And, again, the main part of it is intentionality. That if we want to make sure, just like how we were talking about in terms of the benefits, that go along with making sure that you will privatize. If I, make you privatize and sell it to my cousin, then I get a kickback and these types of things. That the intentionality is that if we can make sure that you don't know this, then these are the subsequent things that will come about from that. If you do know it, then it may be a challenge. So again, in the words of noted historian Dr. John Henrik Clarke, he says, a powerful people never educate powerless people who they plan on oppressing on how to get power. Right? If I say the power is this, what I tell you, and if I plan on keeping power over you, I'll tell you if you get this from me, now you will have the power. I'll say no, the power is the Anansi and Tintang over in the corner. Now you'll spend all your days trying to get this thing and I'm laughing, ha ha ha. That's a bit of an analogy, but yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking some motivation. I was remembering when Cristobal Columbus, the so-called discoverer of America, he had 3 trips. And the first trip, he got in contact with the indigenous people. He has to report back on what he reported back was that they didn't know how to talk. That they were, didn't even refer to the indigenous as human beings. So there were some things there and they didn't know how to talk. And he even reached Cuba, and there are records that he was saying that was Asia. Cuba, that was Asia. And what is more relevant for me is that when they were going back, the second trip, if those in the trip didn't say that they were in Asia and that they saw people who couldn't talk, they would be like, different. Because those coming with Christopher Columbus, they were not intellectual people. They were prisoners, they were uneducated people. So they have to say whatever they say. So when we studied that in the school, always when we heard about Quechua, which are the original languages of the indigenous people, we were more interested in getting to know about the language, not to the extent of writing, maybe those who knew they couldn't write, but they couldn't speak. But our interest in learning that specific local language was there, just by knowing that it was denied by someone. So we wanted to get close to that reality.
Yeah, I think knowledge is very important because once you know something, now you can decide, now let me do something with the knowledge. This is part of the concerted effort to make sure you don't know very much about yourself. Meanwhile, you know Napoleon and Julius Caesar and everyone. Okay, so let's come here. Types of journals. Put this in your notes. You'll need this for your notes. Traditional academic research journal. And again, this is the main venue for primary research. Rigorously blind peer reviewed, sometimes double blind peer reviewed. So you send it out to two different people. Neither of them know who it is, and they are, of course, experts on whatever the topic is. So just on the merit of it is the idea, they will present their report. Also what's referred to as letters journal. Rapid communication in linguistics, these are also called squibs. It's a very short thing that we think is important and we send it out into the public as soon as possible. So rapid communication of interim work, peer reviewed, a good way to get very new and ongoing research initially published. So it may, in scientific journals they do this as well, something very short, publishing the findings, and then the more complete article may come later on. Our review journal covers current trends, usually peer reviewed, contains some commissioned material, so sometimes there's a call for papers, things of that nature. In professional journal or magazine, mainly review and how-to articles. Lots of commissioned material, heavily edited, but not necessarily peer-reviewed, but sometimes it is peer-reviewed as well, right? So these are, generally speaking, the types of journals that you have out there. Are we okay? Linked? Yeah? .sun, sun, .ac, .za /content.php $PID equals 429,497 and SID, that's and the ampersand, SID equals 3879932. We okay? And also original research. And again, this is from another link. You can put this down. Detailed studies reporting original research and are classified as primary literature. They include hypotheses, background study methods, results, and we'll go into these different sections of a given article. Interpretation of findings and a discussion of possible implications. Original research articles are long, with the word limit ranging from 3,000 to 6,000 and can even go up to 12,000 words for some journals. And of course, they require significant investment of time. Pay particular attention to the various sections, hypothesis, background study methods, so forth and so on. As you are structuring your own papers that you will be submitting to your journal, this can be very helpful and instructive. Now, part of it is that, just the idea of best practices and the idea that, this is a general way that articles should be, written. But then another thing is just, expectations. It's not necessarily that this is the only way to do it, and there are other ways to do it, especially in what I call the hard sciences. But if you submit to a journal and you're not following this structure or any type of structure, they may just reject it outright, like, what are you doing? It's not well organized. So part of it is just expectations of these are the best practices in the field. If you don't know this, then whatever content you have isn't even worth entertaining. Okay. Now also we have review articles. So these give an overview of existing literature, and this is from the same link, so if you didn't get it, you can get it here. Overview of existing literature in the field, often identifying specific problems or issues and analyzing information from available published work on the topic with a balanced perspective. So it's basically an overview. It's basically what you would do for your thesis in terms of a lit review, it's something along those lines. These are considered as secondary literature and can be a particularly effective or efficient way for early career researchers to begin publishing, right? Basically, you would need to do this anyway for whatever your topic is. You need to know what has been said, and you yourself will try to fill in the gap of what hasn't been said. Well, as you're doing that, you can even publish what you've done and what you've read and your analysis of it, your evaluation of it. This one was very in-depth. I don't think this one was as in-depth, and this is why I'm saying that, right? So even as you're doing your notes, you can develop that and publish that, the state of the field as it is. Review articles can be of three types, broadly speaking: literature reviews, systematic reviews, and meta-analysis. So you can give an analysis of someone else's analysis. I don't think it's very strong because of this, this, and this. Or I do think it's strong because of this. So review articles are usually long, with a maximum word limit being 3,000 to 5,000 or even more words, depending on the journal. Some also publish short reviews, right? So again, it's a way to get in. Also, clinical case studies. These present the details of real patient cases from medical or clinical practice. Cases presented are usually those that contribute significantly to existing knowledge in or on the field. Signs, symptoms, diagnoses, treatment of disease are considered primary literature and have a word count similar to that of an original article. Clinical case studies require a lot of practical experience and may not be a suitable publication format for early career researchers. So especially in the sciences, those who have their own labs, they're doing experiments, they have equipment, and things of that nature. It can also be medical. So you're in the context of a hospital, you have access to that equipment, you're testing a drug, you're testing whatever the method is. All of these types of things can fall under that. Then clinical trial. This is again specific to the field of medicine. Describe methodology, implementation, results of controlled studies usually undertaken with large patient groups, also long about the same length of original research. They require practical work experience as well as high ethics, standards of ethics and reliability. And again, this is usually experienced researchers. Now, the way early career researchers get in on this is if you have someone who's more experienced and you come in as part of the project, right? Now, there are also ways that those who are more in the humanities can take part of this or in this type of study. So, for example, the Dean of the School of Languages is working on a course book for therapeutic communication. This is talking about how communication plays a role in medicine and things of this nature, nursing, midwives. Sometimes you'll have a case where a person can die of a drug overdose because they just didn't understand the language that things were being explained to them in. So the nurse is saying, we're in a hospital, so we'll speak English. Now you're coming here for treatment, you don't understand English. It's like, if you don't understand, then now the person has taken an overdose because they didn't even understand what was being done. So, that's a very, stark example. But again, what we're talking about is that all these things that we think are medicinal or scientific, there's a human aspect to it as well. So she's a senior researcher. She's brought me in as well as a researcher on this. So we have someone who is, in the field of nursing and midwifery, and another senior researcher. So you can come in on these types of multidisciplinary studies. Even you're saying, I'm doing African studies, this is irrelevant to me. It may end up being relevant because this is the trend, multidisciplinary research, working with someone who's in the sciences, working with someone who's in medicines, working with someone who's in pharmaceuticals, and seeing how does this impact people on the ground. Why are people saying, I'm not going to this Ebola treatment center? You understand? What's the human aspect of this? Why are they saying, all right, you're saying I shouldn't eat this, I'll eat it anyway. Bushmeat, why? Well, you can just say this is what the science says and therefore you'll do it. But if people are saying they're not going to do it, what's the human aspect of why they're saying they won't do it? And why may that decision be even in their interest for them to say we're not going to do it? So again, looking at these things from different angles. So here's a projector. I'm seeing it from this front perspective. You're seeing it from the back perspective. You're seeing it from the side perspective. You understand? To say my perspective is the only way to see it is saying only science. To say your perspective is the only way, only humanities. To say your perspective, okay, well, social. This person here, economics. But imagine if we can bring in all these different perspectives. There's a story in the Orisha tradition. This is Yoruba spirituality, where they talk about Eshu. And Eshu is an Orisha of the crossroads and is often seen as being someone who is about trickery. They call it the divine trickster oftentimes. And in the story they say he decided to test the friendship between these two friends. And they were so close and they had farms on either side of the road. So Eshu said, I'm going to walk down this road and on this side I'll have a red hat on. It will look red. This side it will be the same hat but it will look black. So he dressed up so elegantly, he had to be noticed, and he walked between these two friends. And, one friend said, did you see that man who just passed by and had elegant red hat? And the other friend said, red hat, are you blind? It was a black hat. No, it was a red hat. No, it was a black hat. No, it was red. And they almost came to blows over whether this hat was red or black. And Eshu said, oh, no problem. Let me go back between them. Then he walks in. Said, "Oh, my friend, you are right. Sorry, it was a black hat." No, you were right. Sorry, it was a red hat. No, it was a black hat. No, it was red. And they almost come to blows again. I think the story is very clear.
Yes.
Right, just seeing things from different perspectives. So if you have it, I have it, we have it. Imagine if we all come together and say, from this side it looks red, from that side it looks black. Now we have a fuller perspective on these things. Right. So even in our traditions, our spiritual traditions, our African literary traditions, they can inform what our research is and how we deal with things in academia. Also, there's perspective, opinion, and commentary articles. So these perspective pieces are scholarly reviews of fundamental concepts or prevalent ideas in the field. Usually essays that present a personal point of view critiquing widespread notions pertaining to a field. So everyone is saying Columbus discovered America. let's deal with that. How can you discover someone who is already there? If someone walked into this room right now and said, I discovered you, all of you belong to me now, you'll probably do this and try to wake them out of their stupor or insanity. But this is just what this guy did. A perspective piece can also be a review, and sort of like the equivalent of what you would have like an editorial piece, like in a newspaper. There's like the scholarly equivalent of that. Also, it can be a review of a single concept or a few related concepts. These are considered secondary literature and are usually short articles around 2,000 words. This is perspective. Let's move on to opinion. So opinion articles present the author's viewpoint on the interpretation, analysis, or methods used in a particular study. It allows the author to comment on the strength and weakness of a theory or hypothesis. Let's say you've come out and advanced a theory, but I don't think it's a very good way of, articulating this. So recently, I did this. It was an article. I mentioned this to you the first day, and everyone talks about second language acquisition. That's the whole field, second language acquisition. And I decided to challenge that, because when we're saying acquisition, it's just an analogy. And to say, like, I acquire this, and I acquire that, I acquire this, right? But people are dealing with the analogy like it's a holy thing, like we have to look at it this way. But what if we employed a different analogy and say learning a second language is like a journey, migration? So let's say second language migration, and the things that influence you to migrate physically are similar to the things that make you say, let me move closer to this language or let me stay away from it, right? So it's just challenging. Everyone is saying this. Well, the gap is that everyone is saying this. Let's look at it from a different perspective. Maybe that can shed more light on what's going on here, right? All right, so again, it allows the author to comment on the strength and weakness of a theory or hypothesis. They're usually based on constructive criticism and should be backed by evidence. Such articles promote discussion on current issues concerning science, and these are usually relatively short articles. Commentaries are short articles, usually around 1,000 to 1,500 words, that draw attention to or present a criticism of a previously published article, book, or report explaining, and this is usually the equivalent of like a rejoinder. Someone has published an article, I'm going to comment on the article that they did. And sometimes these can become long, epic debates where I publish an article, this person publishes a rejoinder to my article, and now I publish a rejoinder to their article. So sometimes, especially in linguistics, in the 70s, you have these series of articles and responses that everyone in the field sees as foundational to moving the field forward, right? You have book reviews published mostly in academic journals, and the aim of the book review is to provide insight and opinion on recently published scholarly books. Also, relatively short articles and less time consuming. They're a good publication option for early career researchers. I actually have a book review that I did for something else that I'm actually considering sending out as, an article. So all of this information is here at this link. Hope everyone has it down. Now, some of this is more generic information, but what we'll do is that we'll narrow it down to things that are more specific and that will be very relevant to you as you are writing any of these types of articles. But generally, if you just do a Google search for types of journals and types of articles, these links and other helpful links will come up just from doing that. And then also you have theoretical articles, and these articles do not contain or do not usually contain original empirical research, but use existing research to present a new theory or to analyze or criticize existing theories. So I just did a theoretical article and submitted it to the Contemporary Journal of African Studies, which is our journal here. Now, I actually had this article accepted at a very widely known international journal in the US. So they accepted it, but I decided to pull it from that journal because I wanted to publish in Africa. And some of my colleagues said, why would you do that? But that's the reason why. And what I'll do is I'll actually, who's the class rep here? You. What I'll do, I'll get your email. I'll send you an advanced copy of the article. It's supposed to come out by the end of this year, but it's a proof preprint copy. And I want you all to look at it and assess it. And again, it's coming from a theoretical perspective. Now, from the outset of the class, and based on what the Kwame Nkrumah chair said, this is what we're saying we don't have enough of in Africa. Usually it's let me go to my village, let me report back, and that's it. But where's the value addition? If we're going to mine gold, now we send it somewhere and it ends up as parts of computers. That is industrial value addition that we could do here, and that creates all types of cottage industries. But oftentimes in Africa, what we do is we just go dig the pit, sift out what we can sift and then sell it, and whatever else happens. So all of these other thousands of jobs, millions of jobs go somewhere else because gold is used industrially. Gold is used, of course, jewelry, that's what we usually think about, but in so many other avenues, and that's just an example. We could talk about cocoa, we could talk about anything that we have here. Usually it's just a resource-based economy. Let's take it and send it out and let them do the value addition. But again, this is what we have as a problem with our research too. We'll just go to the village, write it down, send it out. So what types of theories can have an impact on how we see the world, how we approach this subject? You understand? So again, I'll send that to you and you can make it available to the others. So now we come here to constructing a research paper. And I asked, has anyone written any type of article, scholarly or otherwise, for public consumption? No? Has anyone written a term paper or a research paper or something like this for a class? Research papers?
Articles I have written.
Okay.
In Spanish.
Okay. All right, no problem. So this is going to be very important for you, this section that we're coming into now. So we'll deal with how to construct a research paper. And what we're dealing specifically with research paper, what you'll find is it holds for some of the other types of article, types that we mentioned, theoretical papers. A lot of them will be structured along similar lines. And basically introduction, discussion, and conclusion. Now the main thing that we'll deal with is the discussion briefly here, but the discussion is mainly the core of the paper. It covers the argument and counter arguments in detail. This is very brief. We'll go much more in depth into what the discussion section will be about shortly. And then the conclusion evaluates what has been discussed in relation to the wider field, and it also directs the reader to future work. And what's that? Now this isn't a hard and fast or rigid method, but these are suggestions that you can follow. Now a lot of writers prefer to start off by creating an outline, and what it does is it helps to make sure that you stay on topic and you don't veer off into other things, and it also helps you to see that each section is covered appropriately, right? So if you say, oh, I meant to cover this topic, but I only have 2 sentences, well, is it really something that needs its own subtopic? Perhaps it can be either incorporated into another section, or it should be expanded so it's really worthy of being a topic. So you can deal with it in terms of section subheadings. This is usually what you have in terms of a thesis, right? So if it's waste management, that's the overall theme. Then you can say, you can break it down based on your literature review, based on, the different areas that you cover, Tamale, Yendi, Abu Glushi, whatever you're dealing with, right? You can also deal with it in terms of bullet points or short topic notes, right? So you make sure, in this paper I want to make sure I deal with this. It may not necessarily be sequential. It may just be I need to make sure that once I start writing that this is part of it. And it's good to write it down because your thoughts on it will change. Like you may work on the article for up to a year or more. So your thoughts when you start off will be completely different from your thoughts once you've done some research and after a year's time. So you may decide, let me remove this bullet point, let me add in this on the basis of what I've done. You can also do your outline in terms of entire sentences, right? And then also, if it's a research paper, you may want to start off dealing with the literature and look at quotes that you think are relevant. And there's one thing that I like to do, right? I'll look at all the quotes that I can find that are relevant, then I'll write around the quotes, right? And it's, it's a way that I find very helpful as opposed to just writing and now trying to shove the quotes in. I already know all the things, all the relevant research, and now I'm writing in between those quotes and I'm connecting them in a logical type of way, right? So any of these are useful ways, and none of them are the only way to deal with this. Now in this you may make an outline and then you may decide to say, all right, as I'm typing I'm going to keep looking at my outline, right? Another option along the lines of writing in the quotes is to write into the outline itself. So I've dealt with this point, this point, this point. Now let me write underneath this point everything that concerns that point. Or let me shove all the quotes that are related to this topic underneath there, and then I'll write around them from there. Same thing for this next sub-theme. Let me just find all the quotes. Anytime I have a thought about it, let me come back and type underneath that sub-theme. I hope you're following along. Okay. And then also your outline may change over time. So you shouldn't say, all right, I'm so stuck to my outline, it has to be exactly like this. It can't be anything other than this. People are looking tired. Do we need to stand up and do Cheche Kule? Anyone? Does anyone know the song? No, seriously. Please. Stand up. Luckily, there's no law or rule that says we can't do this in class. Please.
I don't remember how you sang it and how dashes that even came to me.
Let's see.
I remember the actions. Yeah, I remember the actions. That's good. Okay, so Mississippi. Hey,
so let's sing it. Yeah, you sing it and I'll do or we'll all do the response. Cheche Kofisa. Kofisa Langa. Lala Kilanga. Okay, good. Let's stretch. Okay. Oh, I hear cracking and popping, popping and locking. All right. So anytime I see eyes looking droopy, we'll get up and do some Cheche Kule, or we'll institute a class call and response. Or I say academic and you say writing. Academic. Writing. Academic. Writing. Academic. Writing. Yes, that makes it more exciting. Right. So African people, this is another thing that sometimes we do research and we say, oh, African people, they do call and response in the Anansi stories and in the games and in songs. Well, if we know that, how come we can't do that in our teaching? right? It shouldn't be, yes, we've written that that's what they do, let them do it. Why can't it be here too, right? Academic.
Writing.
Academic.
Writing.
Academic.
Writing.
Yes. It makes it seem like, yeah, let's go. So, introduction. This explains motivation for the essay, right? Or paper or article, whichever it is. Oh, I think I told you all about this app, Academic Writing in English. Did I tell you about this? No? Just do a search. I know it's for the Play Store. I'm not sure if it is in the App Store for Apple.
The one for UCL.
Yes. So, even as I was composing the slides for today, I was using that as a reference. It's very, very comprehensive and it's right there on your phone. So anytime you're writing, you can just... And I think I told you all that this was recommended to me by the former Pro-Vice Chancellor. So he looked at it and he was like, this is very thorough, very good. If someone follows this, very good. Very good. Yeah.
Because sometimes in the course of writing, I get that. So I go to sentence construction, sentence sequence, paragraph transition, and all that, and then I use it.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, so as you learn, you should be implementing what you learn in what you do. Very good. So again, the introduction explains the motivation for the essay. It introduces previous work. And if previous work is extensive, you may break that off into its own section called literature review. So this is now your literature review section. So if it's not extensive, you can just say, let me tuck all of that into the rubric of introduction. But especially when you're doing your thesis and things of that nature, there will be a separate literature review. And this is really what you should do. You should do a literature review before you even start doing anything else. Because perhaps you say, oh, this is my research topic. Now, if you haven't done the research review, your topic may have already been done. And now you're saying, yes, this is new contribution to the field. I say, don't you know Anderson 1992? Right? Now, if you knew, then you can say, but I know that, but I'm doing something different. Right? I'm filling a gap that Anderson didn't even think of. Right? But you have to know what's out there. Right? So assessment of the problem, assessment of where the gaps are, and then what you're going to do is you're going to fill in those gaps. Right? So the lit review describes and analyzes previous research that relates to the paper, right? So whatever your topic is, first thing you do is say, all right, who else has written on my topic? What do they say? Have they done a very good analysis, whatever? Did they not do it well? Did they not even do it from an African-centered perspective? Maybe just my own perspective is what I'll be adding to the discourse, right? So you reiterate what others have said about the topic. You also present important sources and understanding of them via analysis and evaluation. Academic.
Writing.
Academic.
Writing.
Academic.
Writing.
Oh. So I mentioned that the introduction will deal with it more in depth here. So what it does is it states the research questions and or hypothesis. You may come to your topic with something to prove that I think that this is what it is. And then you can either be proved or disproved. Now some people like to leave it open-ended with research questions as opposed to a hypothesis. And this is even what Prof. Campbell was alluding to when he said positivism. Now, positivism is this idea of, it's really rooted to the idea of you have to have a hypothesis. You have to have empirical data that either proves or disproves the hypothesis. Research questions are more open-ended. Why is this the case? Then whatever it is, you deal with it as it comes. But it's not necessary to say that one method is better than the other. You can choose to do it as you think the situation demands. So also in your introduction, you should explain why your hypothesis or research questions are important. Who cares, right? Waste management, who cares? How is it relevant to anywhere else in Ghana? That's a Techiman problem. So those things should be made clear from the outset. Now, if you yourself are not clear on why it's important, it will be very difficult for you to articulate to someone else why it's important. So you should be very clear and firm on why this information is relevant to Ghana, to Africa, to African studies, to global Africa as a whole, right? If you're doing research in Techiman, how does it relate to anyone else in Ghana? How is that similar to what's going on in, say, Burkina or Senegal or Congo or anywhere else? And how is that similar to the black community in the US, to the black community in the UK, black community in Colombia, Brazil, in the Pacific Islands, Tasmania, Australia, right? Now, it may be beyond your scope to deal with all of those things, but the implications, sometimes that can come out in your conclusions or even in your introduction, that what I'm dealing with is more than just this teeny tiny community. There are implications beyond that. And that's, Prof. Gordon, our former Kwame Nkrumah chair, that's his so what question, right? How is it relevant to anything? Who cares? And it's not necessarily a mean question, literally, who cares? Why do I need to know this? You should be able to articulate that. If you yourself can't articulate that, it's a big problem. Then you present the steps to address the research question, and this is foreshadowing what your methodology will be. Are you going to do interviews? Are you going to go to the field? Is it desktop research? Is it purely theoretical? How are you going to attack this problem? So your introduction should also include arguments, the argument that you'll be making or whatever hypothesis that you'll be making. I think that this is the case, right? And for my own PhD, I also had a hypothesis where I thought 100% of the time this would be the case. And this is where I found the utility of hedging, not saying all the time 100%, because it ended up being 98% of the time, 98 point something. So it was close to 100%, but it wasn't 100%. But some of the good things that can happen in your academic writing, sometimes it's a very good thing to be disproven by your research, right? If I think that this is what happens all the time, it shows that there's some level of academic honesty. I'm not going to fudge the results just to prove that what I'm saying, was right. If I say it's 100% and it's actually somewhere around 99, then I'm acknowledging that I was open enough to go to the field and see what the case was. This other one I thought was 0%. It ended up being like 2.00 something like that. It was close to 0, but it wasn't. So sometimes in the course of your research, you come to see, all right, what I thought was the case wasn't exactly the case. And that makes even your research stronger and more believable than to say, whatever I said, that's what it is. I'm only willing to see what I said in the beginning. Academic. 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 Good. And your introduction should also provide a road of how the paper will proceed. That should be a roadmap of how the paper will proceed. So you say in the introduction, I'll cover this, then I'll do the literature review, then I'll do so and so and so and so. It shouldn't simply be a summary, like I already wrote the paper, now let me just summarize. It should be, all of the things that we've covered up to this point. It also may or may not begin with what's called a hook, an interesting anecdote or compelling quote. Usually in journalistic writing, you'll have something like that. You may or may not do that. If you see books, sometimes you'll see authors who begin their chapter with a quote or a proverb or something like that. You can also do that in your academic article, but it's not entirely necessary to do. Right? But sometimes it can make for the paper to be more compelling. It was a stormy night. No one knew what was going to happen. It Like, wow, that's pretty dramatic. Let me read what's coming next. But again, if you do it too much, it can be quite hackneyed. And it's just like, there's no content to this. You're just trying to spruce up the thing. So if you do something like that, you want to make sure that there's something actually to back it. It's not just going to be fluff, right? Now we come to the discussion section of your paper. So in this, you want to present your argument in full, right? Don't leave any stone unturned, and we'll come down to that side. You describe the context of the argument in detail, right? How did this come about, even as a subject of study? Why are you making the argument that you're making? Why is it relevant at this point in time? You can also explain your approach to the argument. Are you coming from a particular school of thought? Is there a particular ism that you subscribe to? Or are you going to create your own ism, right? Is it capitalism? Is it socialism? Is it Marxism? Is it communism? Is it communalism? Is it Ubuntu, right? From what perspective are you going to deal with this? Also in the discussion, you want to defend your argument by presenting evidence, right? That should be very clearly and obviously relevant to the subject at hand. Also consider counter arguments. Now sometimes myself and some of my linguistics colleagues, we can do this one to a fault. We'll do so much, like anything anyone could possibly say to assail our position, we'll deal with it ahead of time and show why that's not correct. Now that can make your article much longer and more unwieldy than you may want it to be, but you want to at least make sure that you've considered what the counter arguments can be, and you're not so rooted and entrenched in your position that that's the only thing that you would possibly, see. It should also be well organized. Obviously, we've dealt with the structure briefly previously. Also define fully key terms that will be employed. Now this can come up in an academic article as your keywords. Academic. 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 Yes. Wonderful. So there may be terms that you yourself are coining, to describe this phenomenon. So for example, I gave you the example of second language migration. So if you tell someone that, they're like, what is that? I heard of second language acquisition. What in the world is second language migration? Well, from the outset, you want to make sure, because this is something that you're introducing, no one will know what it is because you just made it up. So you need to make sure as soon as possible, you let people say, okay, I know what you're saying. Let me try to follow along your reasoning. If it makes sense to me, maybe I'll take that up. If it doesn't, I may dismiss it. But at least, you've explained what it is that you're bringing to the table. And also you want to be flexible. I mentioned before, your structure may change. How you're going to present your argument may change based on the data. You may start off saying, this is what it's going to be. My hypothesis is this. It's going to be this and this. But then what you see in the field may disprove what you thought it was. Now, in the spirit of academic honesty, you want to make sure what I thought it was not the case, right? And sometimes those are the best articles, right? It lets you know that even though this person thought that this was going to be the case, they were willing to relinquish their position based on what the actual real life situation was, right? Then you have your conclusion. And in it, you want to restate your final findings, right? So overall, 98% of this, 2% of that, haphazardly on that. The statement of the impact of your research, right? This is to answer the question of, so what? In partially, you'll also deal with it and deal with the bigger picture. What research might come next, either from you or from future reviewers. So sometimes people refer to this as the future directions, right? I've dealt with all the regions in Ghana, but I think future directions would be to look at similar things in other African countries, right? To see whether this is something that's only Ghana specific or whether it's more universal for the African world or even beyond. You also want to summarize your evidence, not necessarily the entire paper as a whole, but what's the evidence that you dealt with. I saw this in Techima, I saw this in Tamale, I saw this here in Accra, I saw this there. This is the evidence on which I'm basing my conclusions. You also want to look at the bigger picture and why your findings and conclusions matter. So here we have a camera, right? So we start off, with a wide lens, and then we focus in on something specific. Now what you do in the conclusion is that you bring it back wide again. You understand? You're saying this is how it's relevant to everything else. You understand? I've dealt with this specific topic so in depth that sometimes you can be so in depth that you get lost. Like on this camera, if I do so much of a focus in on this, these curtains, you may not even know that it's curtains. You just say it's something tannish there that's out of focus. I can't even see what it is. But now when you bring it back out, now you can understand how this relates to the rest of the room. You understand? The reason why it's meaningful is because it is blocking the sun and all of these types of things. I hope it's clear. Of why your findings and conclusions matter, what impact your findings will have on the field as a whole. You understand? Is this some earth-shattering thing that you've come up with? No one has dealt with this before, and this will shift everyone's research in the field. In linguistics specifically, there's this guy called Noam Chomsky. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Yeah? Now, in generative linguistics, anytime, and here we mainly do functional linguistics, but in generative linguistics, anytime Noam Chomsky says anything, it turns the whole world around. Everyone is just waiting what's going to come out from Chomsky's lips. Then whatever he says, now you have thousands of researchers who follow behind him, either to prove him or disprove him. So he's created jobs for so many linguists. They don't even care whether it's true or not. They're just like, thank you for keeping my job safe. You understand? So, you may have something like that, or you may have something that's more, humble, but you still think it will have an impact on the field. What impact will there be on society more broadly? Based on this new understanding, this is how we should deal with waste management. And then you present your report, and maybe someone in the government sector will take it up, or the private sector will take it up. You understand? So, sometimes you'll hear these declarations by the UN or whoever, and it's based on what scholars have said in the field. Dr. Akrofiansa, she did something on receiving justice in your own language, talking about how, the language of the courtroom, it needs to be based on the people who are in the courtroom. Otherwise, you're disenfranchising them. So may be convicted of something just because they don't even understand what's going on. You understand? Which is really a tragedy and a travesty of injustice. So if you are in a courtroom, sometimes you may be in a place where they say the language of the courtroom is exclusively English. So now you have someone who is charged with something and they only speak Chi. So how can they interact with this courtroom environment? You understand? Are you going to provide an interpreter for them? Or are you just going to say this person is dumb, they don't understand English, convict them, throw away the key? So now this thing that's supposed to be a justice system is an injustice system, just because the person doesn't have access to the language of the courtroom. And it's specifically relevant in Africa because in many places the language of the court and government are the colonial languages. So now you're penalizing the person for not being colonized enough. I hope you're following along. Exactly. So we went to, myself and Dr. Akrofia and Sam, we went to South Africa and we actually listened. South Africa has these 11 official languages and all these things. And it came out that even though the law says that these are the languages, in actual practice, if it's a Zulu speaking place, they may only offer English and Zulu. Then there may even be challenges with the interpreters in terms of their professionalism and their degree of understanding of both and all these things. We saw this with when Nelson Mandela, his funeral. You have someone who's supposed to be doing interpretation. He's dancing. You don't know what he's doing. You understand? So, that's on a huge scale. Imagine in a courtroom, what would happen if this guy gets assigned to someone who, is challenged with speaking or with hearing? You understand? Lock him up, throw away the key. He just cursed me out. But really it was the interpreter who wasn't doing things correctly. So this impacts lives. The breadwinner of the family goes away for 10 years and we don't see them again just because of a linguistic thing that's going on here. So again, this can have implications. All of this was to say these things can have implications for society, on government policy, on international policy, and then on enforcement of policy, right? Now we're going to assign people to this sector. We're going to create a ministry around this entire thing of women's welfare, you understand? Because it's now clear, based on the research that you've done, that this is something that needs to be addressed on a global scale or here. Then, as we mentioned, you also want to recommend future directions, either for yourself, that my scope was only to be able to deal with this, and this is something that I even could have put in earlier, that from the outset, from your outline stage, you want to deal with what your scope is going to be. Are you going to be able to interview every single Ghanaian? I'm going door to door, hello, this is my study. And now after your 250-year study, your beard is nice and white and long, and is it even still relevant? You've interviewed every single Ghanaian. If not, what is your sampling going to be? Are you going to use random sampling, purposive or purposeful sampling? How are you going to deal with these things? So even from the methodology, your methodology is going to foreshadow what your future directions are going to be, because in your methodology, that's going to outline what your scope is going to be. So if I could only deal with this now, in the future researchers may be able to cover more regions of Ghana. I could only do Greater Accra region. Future researchers, or me myself, in the future, I will deal with other regions. Or I only dealt with women in this one, I need to deal with men in the next one, or any of these things. Academic.
Right.
Academic.
Right.
Academic.
Right.
Academic. Now also in your conclusion, you would have things like this, and these are just samples, and this is also out of the app. They gave some sample concluding statements. We have shown in this paper that, right? Other authors have argued that. Our results indicate that. This argument is disputed by. We believe this, whatever it is an important area for future research, right? This is not exhaustive by any means, but these are things that can come up in your concluding paragraphs. It's sort of like a retrospective, either in terms of ideas or what your content has been. And sometimes the best way to get these types of sentences and these types of constructions is by looking at how other effective authors, write. So sometimes the best way to learn how to write is seeing how other people who are very accomplished writers, how they do their own. You understand? And sometimes it's by looking at people who aren't very accomplished writers and say, this is not how. And one thing that I want us to do is that as we get close to the time that you'll be submitting your papers, is that you will do peer review, blind peer review, right? So you'll submit yours to him, you'll submit his to her, and so forth and so on. So that's training you for different skills. One is for editing, one is for reviewing, and you yourself will be great on how well you review your colleagues' papers, right? This prevents you from just saying, it's rubbish. I don't have time for your paper. I'm writing my own paper later for your paper. Right? That's our quality control check. Academic?
Right.
academic.
Right.
Academic. Good. Also in terms of reporting experiments, right? And this is relevant for humanities. It's also relevant when you're doing research with other sections, you know, this type of multidisciplinary thing that we've been talking about. Now for these, they may have a slightly different structure based on just methods, results, and conclusion, right? Now, especially when you're doing some type of empirical experiment, you'll start off with what you want your experiment to test, right? Now, in some of these things, you want to make sure that the way that you're setting up your experiment is, you know, along the lines of best practices, because sometimes your whole article can be thrown out just on the basis that your experiment, your methods weren't done correctly, right? Same thing for linguistics as well. Recently I came across it was supposed to be a book on linguistics, but it was written by a non-linguist. He was actually an electrical engineer. And he started off in such a way that, he was doing a comparison between various African languages and Medu Neter that we talked about earlier, so-called hieroglyphs, right? Now he was comparing contemporary languages with hieroglyphs, and he was saying he needs to do this in order to really follow the comparative method, right? Now the comparative method is a method of looking at these languages in order to reconstruct what the earlier language that all of them are descended from comes from, right? So if in this language you have a T, this language you have an S, this language you have an R, you're going to reconstruct a T for the original language, right? This is just a hypothetical. Now what he did, Medu Neter has not been reconstructed using that method. It's usually based on what Greek writing was and what Coptic writing is, and then they kind of guess, but it's not along the comparative method. So he started off with a methodological fallacy that he's going to use this one that's done with guesswork, then try to use the method in order to reconstruct. First you have to reconstruct the one that hasn't been reconstructed yet before you can do this and reconstruct something older than that. Now anyone who is a trained linguist would know that just from the outset. I hope you're following along.
Yeah.
So just basically, because I'm going a little bit deep into linguistics, just basically you have to know what the methods are, because sometimes everything else you've done, this one, I think he put like 200 or 300 pages into this book. But the book would just be thrown away by anyone who's a trained linguist. Like, you didn't even reconstruct the thing that needs to be reconstructed before you're trying to go earlier than that. But long story short, how data will be collected and measured, right? Interviews. Is it just book research? Are you going to archives? Are you doing mixed methods, right? For your academic. I'm seeing who's paying attention. Some of you are, you're thinking of your girlfriends and boyfriends. Say, this afternoon, yeah, I'll meet them at Akwafu Hall, and yeah. Then how you propose to test your hypothesis, right? All of these things will come in. In terms of results, and we're getting down to our last 3 slides, but be sure to be diligent with your notes, because later on you will say, you didn't teach me, and I will just be looking at your face. So results, you want to, at this point, summarize your data. And here you can also do tables of data. Right, this is what I did for my PhD. Graphs and charts. Initially I started off with graphs and charts, and one of my supervisors said, that's taking up too much space. I had gotten up to like 300 some pages. They said, just write it in prose and then just put a table at the end. And it ended up taking it down to, they only allowed me to do 200 pages. I made mine 202. But just that recommendation was how to do it. So sometimes, you can add in graphs and charts and it can make it richer. Other times it can make it too long. But this is part of what peer review is for. And what you're doing, or what you will be doing on your thesis, is to get you ready for peer review. Now, if you don't have a good level of self-esteem, peer review will break you and destroy you and leave you running crying. But if you know that you're intelligent already, someone will give you advice. You'll say, thank you for the advice. I didn't think about it like that. Thank you. Right? There are some people who just cannot take it. What I think is what I think, and therefore is right just because I thought it, and therefore anyone who tells me something else, it will crack my self-esteem and I'll run home crying. Don't let that be you. Because if you plan on doing anything in academia, everything is going to be peer review. People are telling you that the way you thought about it, you didn't think about it deeply enough. I had someone tell me that for my thesis, my main supervisor. He said, you need to think about why you think what you think and be critical of your own thinking. I said, okay, thank you. Let me take that advice. Also, your results of significance tests. What the test is meant to evaluate and the significance at a particular level. All this will come in. Why is even doing this test significant to anything? So what? Have you proved anything? Yes, no. Then here your conclusion. You'll comment on and evaluate results of your experiment. And then test whether the null hypothesis, this is what everyone says it is. This is the received wisdom. Everyone says this is what is true. And based on your experiment, you may say what everyone thinks is true is not the case. And I'm saying that based on this, this, and this. Now, those who have built their entire career on what everyone is saying is true may try to attack your methodology or attack, anything, your argumentation. You understand? So this is why they say defend your thesis, right? Because what you're saying may pull the rug out under 1,000 people, and they don't want their rug pulled out from under them, and they may want to vigorously try to deal with how you're approaching this, even on a very minute point, but that minute point may make the whole thing fall apart. All right. Whether the null hypothesis was rejected or accepted due to a significant test result and implications. Whether the result could be explained by another reason. You're saying that I got this result because this is what's going on in the community. Someone may say you got that result because you only dealt with young people. If you got a more full view of the community, no one older than 30 would have said this thing. You understand? So even, again, for my PhD, I started off dealing with young literate people, and then my supervisors say, this is a convenient sample. Go to the elders, the non-literate people in the village, and see if they're saying the same thing. And I did that, and they ended up saying the same thing, but I had to prove through due diligence that this is what it actually was, right? Also, how results relate to previous work in wider literature. Useful further research and how that could be conducted, right? Even if you had something you say, I don't think my method was the best, this is the method that should be done. So even being critical enough of your own things, your own methods that you developed or own methods that you decided to use. This is all getting down to academic honesty, and the most successful papers tend to be the ones that are academically honest, because other ones will be torn apart sooner or later. Right? You said it was this, but I did the same study and it was not this. I went to the same village and they didn't say any of these things you said. Now you have to explain yourself. Then finally we'll close out with this one. Structure of scientific essays tends to be slightly different, but you'll see some of the similar elements. You start off with your literature review. Your methodology in this case will describe your approach to a research question, how research was conducted, the philosophical school or standard method followed, summary of experimental design and equipment used. And even in humanities research, some of this information may need to come in your methodology section, right? So it may just be a brief footnote. Oh, I use SPSS software. I went, from there. I'm using functional linguistics. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But all of this needs to be articulated and clear. If it's not, then someone will definitely call you on it. And let me not underestimate, I've beaten this horse to death, but let me beat it one more time to make sure it's really dead. Literature review. Here at the Institute, I've been to people who are presenting on their topics, and they have been cut up and ripped apart to shreds because they did not do a good literature review, right? Now, some of the other scholars who were here at the Institute, they knew very well about these things. So don't assume because I'm just learning about it, it means that everyone is just learning about it. Because you may assume that now you come. Did you consult this scholar? Did you consult my own article that I wrote on this? Because this is my field since 1999 and I've written 10 academic papers on it. And you're sitting there like, oh, I didn't know that you wrote on this, prof. You understand? It can be very embarrassing. So all things grow out of your literature review, even in terms of whether or not you need to do anything further. All right, let's continue. Data collection, how your data was gathered. And again, sometimes people will try to poke holes in how you gather your data. If you say, all right, I just went to my village and I went to my home and I asked my mother and father, is this what it is? They said, yes, son. Is that the most rigorous way of gathering your data? And really you just wanted to go home and eat some banku? And you use this as an excuse. Oh, I need to do research. Give me 5,000 CDs to do my research. Right? And you're ending up paying for people's school fees. Finding summary, you want to summarize info that you have drawn out of your data. So you start out with just numbers, or you start out with just interviews that are transcribed. How does it relate to anything? So always think about these 3 R's. How something relates, how it's relative, and how it's relevant. If you can answer those things, you have a strong paper, or at least the basis of a strong paper. How it relates, how it's relative to other things, and how it's relevant to anything else, for your society, for your field, for anything else. All right. So you have your data, you want to be able to answer those 3 R's. Then your analysis, how information can be broken down to uncover relationships. This is what we're talking about, or have been talking about in terms of value-added research, right? You've come here, you've presented your seminar, you've given us all this information. Now we had another scholar who came here from outside the Institute. She did all of this, she gave anecdotes and quotes and information. And our past Kwame Nkrumah chair said his question that he always says, so what? And this scholar had a very hard time. It's like no one ever asked me. I thought just telling you this stuff, that I thought that was it. So at the end, you know, it's like this. You don't want the very first time you think so what to be when you're on the hot seats. You should be able to say, this is why it's important, this is why it's relevant, this is why it's relative to everything else. You understand? And then academic. I'll be springing this on you for the rest of the semester, so get used to it. Anytime one of you wants to fall asleep, your colleague will say, writing. Oh. What are we writing? What are we writing? Are we writing? And then also in terms of your structure, it can also be done chronologically or logically. So it can just be based on, I started off doing this. I went here, I did this, then I did this, then I did this, and then I concluded my study by doing this. You understand? Or it could be based on a logical progression. I had to set up this thing before I could go and do that. I had to set up this thing before I can do that. So again, this is more towards the scientific essays, but you can also structure things along those lines, even when it comes down to subsections. In terms of your methodology, I had to do phase 1 amongst the youth, and then I did phase 2 amongst the non-literate speakers. That's exactly what I had to do. And I didn't plan on doing a phase 2, but my supervisor said, go back to the village. Then even when I got done, he wanted me to send me back. I said, please, Prof, let this be a postdoc. Let me finish. I can't pay for school anymore. All right. So any questions, thoughts, concerns about academic? Academic? Writing. Academic? Writing. I hope it's been useful.
Is it likely we can get a template?
The slides?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let me again get your email. You get my email and just send me something. I'll send this back to you.
We have the worksheet. sheet.
So you can do that now. Do you have everyone else's email?
We just pass it around.
Yeah. So what did you learn today? We'll do this like primary school. What did you learn today in class, ladies and gentlemen?
Literature review.
That's your basis.
Yes, it's important because literature review and methodology. With the literature review, if you don't review your work, it's likely, that's what I realized, it's likely you may reproduce something.
Exactly.
And then with the methodology, if you miss a step, it can just pull off, all
Exactly.
the work you've done.
And sometimes people will just read your methodology to get started, and if there's a hole in the methodology, they'll throw the entire rest of the thing out because everything else is growing based on that. So if you started off growing crooked, they'd be like, no. And then the literature review. This also can lead to accusations of plagiarism. You think you're the first one to do it. You're writing, yeah. How come you didn't cite this scholar? The most preeminent scholar in the whole world writes on this, and they don't want to hear, oh, I didn't know. Because you don't know whether it's worse that you didn't even know or it's worse that you took their ideas without giving them credit. Which one? Either you're incompetent or I don't know. What else?
Yeah, I also learned that you have to be punching holes in your own work. Asking yourself so much.
Yeah. That's very good to do. And it's very good. I recommended this to the last semester that we taught academic writing of before you submit your paper to give it to someone else, right? To read it out loud. There are certain times when you're reading something out loud and you realize that the sentence doesn't make sense. Now you never would have caught it, or you say the twice. If you're just looking and scanning it, you will never see it. But now when you're forced to read it out loud, now you say, oh, and you catch things. Or, you let your wife, your husband, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, or one of your colleagues here look it over. Now they may be more critical of your work than you would be. You understand? But that requires a certain level of bravery. Not much, but at least more bravery than just saying, let me keep mine under lock and key, and then, let me come out. Yeah. Anything else as we're getting these?
Again, with the literature review, I was thinking about my own work. So I realized I had to do more.
Yeah.
Because my topic is neutrality. So it is not just, it could be a very international search that I have to do.
Yeah.
I've been looking about the topic here in terms of Africa, but it's very international and local. And it could be that I will be repeating something I'm not aware of being done in a different community. But still, I have to put a lot more in searching for what is being done, what they're going to do is working. It is working anyway, or I'm not going to be repeating.
Yeah.
I think that was very, very important for me.
Yeah, so if you don't get anything from this class, get that at least. I do want you to get more things from that class from this class than that, but make sure that you definitely understand that point, because when you come up for your proposal, for your thesis and what you want to work on, if you do not take these things into account, all the eyes in the room will look at myself and Dr. Kofi Ansah and say, oh, didn't you teach them about literature review? We'll be like, yes, we said it. How come no one did it? So it will look very bad on us. And I have a record that we did tell you about it, so I won't take the rap this time. No. Anything else? And then we'll close out.
Yeah, with the literature review, it looks like when you get to that point, you have to do a lot of extensive reading
Yes.
in order to identify what gaps you are going to explore to do your work for. And that is the most difficult aspect. Because you might find yourself reading a whole lot of books to identify the gaps that you want to fill.
Yeah. This is one thing that is helpful in terms of technology. If you can see this. This is a PDF, right? Now, in Adobe Acrobat, there's a feature that allows you to have it read out loud to you. So you can be seated somewhere with your eyes closed. You can be, cooking food or doing something else. You just go here to read out loud, read to the end of the document. So literally, I'll go through a 600-page book in like 2 days. And I have 3 children who are committed to making sure that I don't get any reading done. So this is the only way I can thwart their attempts.
In their conception of Chat Avenue, the relationship between the different classes is that of a wood guardian, and that this is the real conception underlying Chat Avenue.
You can slow it down. Let me slow it
Makes
down
no
for you.
provision to safeguard the interests of the wood from the misdeeds of the guardian. 17.4 Whether or not the relationship of guardian and ward was the real underlying conception on which Chat Avenue was based. There is no doubt that in practice the
This
relationship...
is actually about Gandhi. These are the indigenous people of India who Gandhi disenfranchised. So I wanted to read their own writings, right? So I was like, and it's really not like my main area or something. It's just something that I was dealing with. So I was like, okay, let me just do this. So yesterday I started listening to it, and I'm on page 160 out of 298. So I could get done with this book today. So again, a 300-page book, 400-page book, you can get through it very quickly, especially if you have like a block of time to dedicate to it. So just on Saturday, you say, this is what I'll be dealing with. And as you're doing it, you'll be listening. You can take notes on it. You can pause it, copy, and paste your quote that you'll need for your own paper into it. So this is just one of the tricks of the trade. This is Adobe Acrobat. There's also a software called ABBYY. And what it can do, let's say for example you scan a book in, or you scan an article in, what it does is it does text recognition, and it recognizes where the word whether is or not, the relationship, and so forth and so on. So it'll analyze the document, and now that is what allows it to be read by the software. Otherwise it will just look at it like a picture and it can't read anything. But once it does that recognition, now it can pull out all of the documents. Another tool, and we will deal with this more, we can even start off with this next time, is @Voice, and this is for Android phones, and I'm sure there's something similar in the App Store, which I don't have. But this is a PDF of Rasta and Resistance. This is Prof. Campbell's book. So I was like, since he's here, I need to be reading some of his books, and I wouldn't otherwise have time because it's really not like my focus on my area of research. But I said I need to familiarize myself with his work. So I'm a good 10% of the way through actually. But it does the exact same thing. It reads the thing out loud for you. So someone is looking at you, they think you're listening to music, but you're actually listening to the book.
What's the app?
@Voice, the @ like in an email, and then the word voice, all one word. This is extremely helpful to me. So as I'm telling you this, sometimes I'll tell this to students and they're just like, oh, he's talking. I have 7 papers under review right now. Right? So they told us, oh, if you can come out with 2 papers per year, you're doing well. I said, no, I don't plan on just getting promoted when I'm 60 years old. No. Let's get these things moving. And then another function, I don't know if any of you do this, like when you're texting or something, you can talk into your phone and it will transcribe what you've said. You've done that?
iPhone does.
Right, all of them do it.
I do.
Now what you can do is, now this is a tool that you can use for your writing. So open up Word, and you have Word for your phone. There are other word processing softwares. This is Word. So I open it up, and now the same thing I was doing, texting and saying, yeah, baby, I'll be there this evening, yeah. Now I'm doing this for my academic research. You can use it in Evernote. You can use it in OneNote, any of these note-taking services. And as I'm speaking into it, I can literally make I can do my entire article just as I'm going off of the top of my head. You understand? So these are ways that I get articles done. Like literally I can have an entire article done in like a day or two. Right? And then I'll say, all right, I need to go back over it again. Let me make sure all my quotes are in. You understand? But all the functions, especially if you have an outline, you understand? All the topics or bullet points, you'll make sure you've covered all of those topics based on your reading and everything else. So these are things that can really make your life in academia much easier than you had it during typewriter times. Awahin, biwahin, awahin. Right? I hope you're following along. So these are things that I'm telling you that not everyone knows, but if you know this and you harness this, you'll be on a different level from people who are trying to do things and make it hard on themselves by trying to do them as they were done in the 1800s. Right? And I'll give you more of these tips and tools. Google Scholar, JSTOR, how you can use citation software in order to. Sometimes people spend a month just trying to get their citations in order. Me, I do that with one click. So I'll tell you about all of these things as well. More to learn.
Right. The citation and those, I think we did, but also
Okorofia,
took us to the librarian.
Yeah.
Took us through some of the citation.
Wonderful. I think even today we got something on the listserv that there's something on Mendeley. You can download this app called Mendeley. It's for desktop primarily, but it's also on phones. And what it is a citation software. So you go to Google Scholar or JSTOR or anything else, you click to cite it and it downloads it and you import it into the program. Now just with the click of a button, it's doing all of the citations for you. So all of these things, and we'll go more in depth because we actually have a class that's going to deal with that specifically. But there are so many things that you can use.
Is it at voice allowed reader?
Yes. Yes. When it comes on your phone, it will just say at voice for the sake of space, but that's the full title. And this is why I was saying that today, the librarian at Baum Library, who actually used to be our librarian for African Studies, she sent something out saying that they're going to do a training for Mendeley software. And they do this from time to time, EndNote software, Mendeley software. There are others that are out there as well. But what you'll find is that I had a colleague who he and I were going to finish around the same time, but I ended up finishing a year before him because what he was taking months to do, I just pushed a button and did. Right. Let me see. Yeah, that was actually today from 9:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. So you couldn't have taken advantage. But it was on Science Direct, which is, okay, you saw it? Okay. Science Direct Scope. Yeah. But these are opportunities that come up from time to time.
In the last part, one app you mentioned, the one about talking and recording.
Yeah, so this is just standard on any keyboard on Android, for example. So let's say if I'm going to do an SMS text, right? I'll just start my SMS and then I open up the keyboard, then I hit the microphone button.
Oh, okay.
So when I do that, now I am typing, period. I don't have to use my hands. And actually it's coming up here. Now I'm typing up here, I don't have to use my hands. Up here, I just said up here, now it's saying anything that I'm saying, even when I don't want you to say it. Stop saying what I am saying. And it's saying to stop saying what I'm saying. I'm doing. So the same way that you can use this to make a text go, there's Microsoft Word for the phone. There's also Office Suite. There's another one. Which one is this one? Olive Office Premium. So any of these are word processing things, and what it allows you to do is you can save it to Dropbox. So once you're done, it will automatically show up, so now you can open it on your desktop and do any further editing you want to do. You can also save it directly to Google Drive, so you can open it up in Google Docs or on your laptop again. So all of these things are tools that you can use. There's a app that I use called OneNote. Before I was using Evernote, and I liked Evernote better, but they went to a paid service only. You can only use it on 2 devices. I say buy for you. Let me use a free one. So OneNote, it allows you to just copy and paste. Anytime you have a note from anywhere, see something on the internet, you put it in there. It'll show where on the internet you got it from. You can record your voice into it. So I have about 100 ideas for journal articles that I've just put into here. So once I have a free second, I'll say, oh, let me take that up. Now I'll develop it into an article. And sometimes it's just by speaking what I wanted to say into the thing.
OneNote.
OneNote.
One as in 0.
One.
Oh.
This.
I always confuse you. Remember the other day?
0 NE.
0
Yes, I said 0 NE. I like that one better, 0 NE. And what I'll do also is that I will put this video up online and give the link to you. I'll put my address on this too, so you are in charge of it, because if I'm in charge of it, it won't get done. So what I'll do, I'll just get your email address and send it to you. You'll be in charge of distribution of anything else. Okay. Okay, any other thoughts, questions, or concerns? There's plenty to learn, plenty that can be done. And hopefully we'll cover as much as possible. And really, if you follow these things, and last time we taught academic writing, I had some students who really took on to some of these ideas, especially the tech side. And when it came to them writing their papers for other things, you could see a universe of difference between those who followed and those who didn't follow. Someone just like, oh, I don't really get it, let me just do it my way. And then when they get their grades back, they don't like it. There's a line that says, the fault in every kind of character comes from not listening. The fault in every kind of character comes from not listening. I hope you're following. I hope you're listening. Right. Okay, so that's it for today. Academic. Right. Academic. Right. Academic. Right. Yes, we'll have fun.